Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that better?
It's perfect. You look fine. You look fantastic, by the way. I looked up that YouTube you did the interview with that guy from like some new book club or whatever, but I haven't seen you in a long time and I think you look great.
Well, thanks. It's I turned 75 this year,
Holy moly.
which is
Oh
a good
man.
thing and it's a
Yeah.
challenging thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know. I can't remember the last time I saw you, but thank you for taking this time today. I think it's really cool. I saw on LinkedIn that you wrote the book, um, The Scott Boys, and I didn't know that it was like a Civil War type story. And we're gonna definitely get to that point because I have a whole bunch of questions about like the writing process that you went through, what made you decide to do it. I'm sure you've had and you said you've thought about doing it and you wanted to do it for a long time, but then what was it that actually made you do it, right? Because that's kind of like what my podcast is about is like taking chances, taking chances and then like why not you? Like why am I not doing something that I wanted to do for a long time? And this is one of the things is this podcast. I got the opportunity to do it because of a lot of reasons, and I love doing it. I love talking to people, and I love hearing their story. And I want you to tell the story. But I think before we go into the book details, I know I spent a lot of time with you traveling and when we got together for work and everything like that. And I think you had a pretty interesting life growing up, which probably spurred you to think about writing the book. But I want to hear it from you, like the young Scott Anderson, growing up like from elementary school and then working your way through to get to that point of, okay, hey, I'm a published author now and my book is up for an award.
yeah, damn, we got more than 2 hours.
Yeah. We get as long as you as long as you want, but I want you to get to that point of talking about the book. And again, I have questions about it, like right what the writing process was like. And then what I started to realize now about this podcast is like, why would I want someone to listen to this podcast? Similar to like, why would you want someone to read the book? Is it informational? Is it entertainment? Is it both? Just so people have an idea, okay, why do I want to read that book? And we'll get there.
If you go back to the elementary school time period, I can tell you that if you would have walked up to me when I was playing first base in Little League at Knox Park and I was 12 years old, and you would have said, Scott, in your lifetime, you're going to do boom, 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 boom. I would have looked at you like you had a third eye in your forehead.
Yeah.
But the good Lord has blessed me with so much in my life. And I started work when I was about 8 years old. My grandfather's lumber company. I sorted lumber for the cabinet shop, and I ran water to the men at the sawmill. I started pumping gas when I was 12 years old. I pumped gas at Bill Henry Shell service station. Gas was 18 cents a gallon, and we washed your windshield and checked your oil and air in your tires. And if you filled up, we gave you a free set of drink glasses. I mean, what
Oh,
was
yeah.
wrong with that at 18 cents a gallon? Uh, all through high school, I worked. The summer jobs I had, uh, I mowed the local utility board. I was their groundskeeper, so I would mow all the substation areas and the areas around the buildings, and just take care of that and clean it up. 2 summers in a row, I worked as a brick mason's laborer, mixing cement and carrying brick and block to build the Baptist church and the courthouse in our little hometown, which kept me in pretty good shape, I'll tell you, for football.
Remind me, Scott, what city you're talking about, where you grew up.
Little town Athens, Tennessee. It's in East Tennessee, halfway between Knoxville and Chattanooga. Uh, After that, my parents divorced when I was 18. My dad took everything, kind of left us with nothing. I mean, he borrowed money against the house and left. So we were in a pretty big hole. And so my brother was geez, Steve was 14 at the time. I was 18. And he went to work at the pro shop at the golf course. And he was good enough. He won enough money off the old guys playing golf. He won more money there than he earned in the pro shop. But uh, I worked after school. My freshman year in college at an automobile dealership as the assistant service manager, where I learned how to change rear ends out under Chevrolet pickup trucks because they had a recall on them. But I also learned a lot about the paperwork and the business side of business at that particular juncture because, I was involved in the warranty claims, the parts ordering. There was just a whole lot of stuff that I was doing. And then they had the draft, and I was in the first draft. I was number 44. My roommate was number 4. And we had a party that night to celebrate the fact that we were all going to Vietnam. And long story short, I had high blood pressure and I was 4F, so I didn't have to go. That's another thank you, Lord moment. And came back and went to work for my uncle in construction and ran a bulldozer, poured slabs for housing projects, dug ditches, put pipe in the ground. And, I would work for a couple of quarters and save up enough money to go to school and then go back to college for a couple of quarters. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years. I got out of school. I was 1/4 short of a degree in journalism and ended up moving to Tallahassee, Florida, and going to work for the Tallahassee Democrat, the newspaper down there, and stayed there for a couple of years and then came back to East Tennessee, worked for recreation departments. And then I moved to Memphis in 1978, and that's when I got in the construction equipment business. I started out as a marketing support guy for a dealership over in Memphis, and that time they were building this Tennessee Tom Bigby Waterway project, which some have called the largest pork barrel boondoggle in the world. But it's paid benefits since it was built. But anyway, so I went to work on that. And during that time period, those people that worked on that waterway were what we would classify as major accounts. It was Zachary, it was Kiewit, it was Bechtel, it was Fluor, it was Marson Knudsen, and those were the people that I dealt with. And through that experience, I learned that there's a whole lot more to that business than really what I had been exposed to by being an inside guy. And I was uh, I was hired away by a little Japanese company, Kawasaki, and went to work for them. When I started at Kawasaki, there were 12 of us. There were 7 Japanese and 5 Americans. And when I left, we had about 200 people. We had about 10% market share. And I left because I was hired away by a British company after 16 years. They hired me away, JCB, to move to their new facility in Savannah, Georgia. And I was vice president of sales for North America. The beautiful thing about JCB is that it was a family-owned business. The scary thing about JCB is that it was a family-owned business,
Yeah.
and if they walked in one day and didn't like the shirt you had on, boom, you're gone. So they replaced the president because he got sideways with the owner, and the new president came in, and it was kind of like, I had been part of the Kennedy administration, and Nixon came in, and Nixon wanted all his own people. So me and a bunch of other guys got shown the door, and that's when went to work for John Deere in the role of Nortrax. I was general sales manager for what was then called the Central Region, and I did that for a couple of years, and then they moved me to Nashville, and I was the general manager of the Nashville store. And then Roger Moore called me up one day, and he said, He said, "Do you think you might be interested in coming to work for John Deere?" And I said, "Well, in what capacity?" And he explained the corporate business division to me. And I was like, wait a minute, I get to go sell to these major accounts and I don't have to manage anybody. And he said, "That's right." I said, "Throw me in." But probably the happiest I was, John, was when he ran this by me. He goes, "You're not interested in moving to Moline, are you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you have in mind?" And he goes, "Well, we'd really like to leave you where you are." And I went, "Oh, I'm definitely in now." So I went to work for them in 2005 and retired from there in 2016. And the corporate business division model, you were a part of it. I mean, you were immersed in it like I was, but it was a unique model in the industry, and it was something that John Deere built in direct response to the large contractor need. And that was they wanted a single point of contact. If they were going to work in Washington or Florida or Texas or California, they wanted to be able to call one person to get that ball rolling and coordinate everything for them. And Roger Moore, he took the information and he had the foresight to construct this. And you think about it in these terms of 40 something thousand people in John Deere, and there were 18 of us that had direct customer contact on a regular basis. And that's a pretty select group. And what they did with me was it was kind of scary because I walked in, I said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said, "Well, here's a list of customers that we've never sold anything to." I was like, "Oh, this is great. That's my book of business. You're not selling them anything." And it was primarily pipeline contractors and people that were cross-country pipelines, people that were putting in windmills, solar. I mean, the energy industry was exploding at that time in the golly, man, that was early double knots, I guess, or yeah, mid double knots. Anyway, a guy by the name of Neil Lane had built a model up in Canada where he partnered with Brandt Tractor. And Neil was the corporate business manager for John Deere in that territory. And they built a model that was very successful in that British Columbia marketplace and Alberta as well. And we went up and we worked with Brant and we worked with Neil and put together a model that we brought back to the United States. And we went from selling 2 machines a year into the pipeline industry, which is what they'd done the year before I came to work there. And we were selling, I don't know, 600 or 700 machines a year by the time I retired in 2016. And John Weaver was as invested in it as I was. We had great support from people like Mike Watkins and Roger and the John Deere finance guys. I mean, the people that sat where you sat for a while. But the thing that really drove that business model was the ability to put yourself in front of the customer and make a deal. And when I say make a deal, you would be responsible for crafting the numbers of machines, where the machines were delivered, coordinating the dealership's response and building a team within the dealership to integrate with the customer so that everything was seamless. And there were a bunch of different moving parts to it, but fundamentally, it was the freedom to be able to go in there and you were executing your own business plan. You created it and you executed it. And I admire Roger because it took it, the way Deere is constructed,
Yeah.
and you've got a lot of guardrails up, and rightfully so. But Roger was able to push through that, and he was able to put us in a position where we could go create our own business models. It was a hell of a lot of fun. I'll put it that way. I mean, we went in the pipeline business. We went from selling 2 machines a year to 50% market share, and we got Caterpillar's attention.
Yeah. One other thing about the corporate business division, and you know this because you were there and everything, but not only did you have that direct relationship, the single point of contact, but I think another goal that Roger had based on customer feedback was the customer experience across the channel, right? Like that was, they wanted it to be consistent. And I don't think a lot of people understand that where, these aren't franchises like where, they're deer owned. I mean, Nortrax was, but these are independently owned dealerships
Correct.
that do things the way they've been doing it for 75, 100 years. And then what we would do, and you did it, is have that customer have the same experience in Washington State, in Texas, and in Florida with the dealer. Now, that took a lot of work, like you said. I mean, this is now you're trying to wrangle in three different business models that they all have, but the customer only saw you and knew you were going to take care of them. And I think that was another unique thing that Deere has is that channel and that consistency. It's like McDonald's, right? If you go to McDonald's, wherever, you want that same cheeseburger to taste the same way. You want that customer that's buying a piece of machinery to have that same dealer experience. And you mentioned Mike Watkins, and I feel like I've been thinking about this a lot lately with the dealers, is that in my opinion, the product support side of the business is 10 times more important than the sales side of the business now,
Yeah.
you know? And I don't know if they are keeping their eye on that. They tried to kind of make that shift like, oh, all of a sudden we are interested in part sales and we are interested in this. And it's like, hey guys, this is where it's at nowadays. That whole thing where sales sells the first and product support sells or service sells the second. I don't know about that. I think it's you got to have that support way ahead of in advance. Um, there's so many stories about when we worked together. Like I remember that like I don't know what it was. I think it was like Roger or John Hale like wanted you to take me under your wing and like show me the way of like, all right, let's go meet some customers, right? And then one story I want you to share, and I don't know how much you remember of it, but was the time we worked with Carew and we created that class and we went and did the selling class to the dealers and and the time when we did the class and then um we had to go get our feedback from my manager or I think it was our manager, right, Larry? Do you know the story I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, come on.
No,
So
come on, remind me.
all right, we were in Baltimore. It was the first pilot. It was the pilot class, and you were there, and we did the class. And then the next thing you know, they like one of the dealers was there. That was a big. It was Tim Murphy was there, and it was like, hey, we got to do a good job so that he can buy into this, and we want to like roll it out. But after that first day, Larry's like, hey, come up to my room. We want to go over what happened today in the class. So me and you went up to his hotel room. We went in his hotel room and he had to give us the feedback on how we did during the class. It was weird. Uh,
Yeah, it was Larry.
yeah. Another story, remember we were traveling up in the Northeast, and that's when I started, you started telling me, I didn't, you skipped over, like, when were you into the racing the cars?
Oh my goodness. Good. Uh, I've been hooked on it since I was 11 years old and walked into a drugstore and saw a Sports Illustrated magazine with a guy named Phil Hill leaning up against the front of a Ferrari. And I went, that is just so cool. And I was hooked. And because of that, in his involvement, he was the first Formula One champion out of the United States in 1961, driving a Ferrari. But I'm growing up in this little town in East Tennessee, and I didn't know what the world was like, but I found Formula One, and suddenly I knew where Monza was, and Spa, and Kyalami, and Silverstone, and Paul Ricard, and Suzuka. And it opened up a whole wide open world for me. And I began following racing. When I was 18, 19 years old, I worked with these guys that they had a Chevrolet Corvette in 1967, and they had a 61 Dodge Lancer that is arguably the ugliest car that Detroit ever made. But it had we had a 426 Hemi in it, Sox and Martin transmission and rear end, and we were turning high tens in AHRA in 1971, which was hauling ass. I mean, that was fast. So I worked with them. Uh, in my college years, I worked with a guy named Bob Lamb, and Bob had an MGA twin cam. He had a Lotus 10, and we road raced those cars, and that was fun. And then I kind of got away from it when I got out into the business career, and then when I made a little money, I started going to Skip Barber in Lime Rock, Connecticut, Mid Ohio, Sebring, Florida, and driving Formula Fords. And they're open wheel cars, rear engine, 1600 cc's, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're going 110 miles an hour with your butt 2 inches off the ground, it's flying, man. It's fast. So I, I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then I started traveling with the Kawasaki job, and I had to get away from that. And then I got to a point in my career with Kawasaki where I was stable. I was in Atlanta. I was in the process of getting married, and I built a SCCA, Sports Car Club of America, improved touring car, and ran primarily at Road Atlanta for about 5 or 6 years. Also ran Roebling Road, Mid Ohio. Uh, just had a great time doing it. I'll share this with you. I was the Atlanta Region Sports Car Club of America Rookie of the Year when I was 43 years old. There were 50 people that were rookies that year in the Atlanta region, and I outpointed all of them.
See, there you go. It's never too late, right?
So that's another thing that has kind of been a theme in my life is the automotive side. And since I've retired, uh, I've done quite a bit of work on that particular segment of my life. I've written a lot of short stories about it. I go to historic car races, talk to the owners, the drivers, take pictures of the cars. And I have worked for the last 4 or 5 years with a group here in Nashville and in Florida that is curating a car collection for a private collector. And that has just been a blast because they have got some of the nicest examples of vehicles you have ever seen. They're pristine.
Um, so I want to change gears into the writing and I want to share a couple things that I learned from you. And I still use these today with when I was in CBD with you. And I think it was you, definitely was you, that created like it was in Excel, but you created like a calendar of travel. And then you were like, "Hey, look, these are the amount of times that I'm going to be out of the office, and these are the times that I'm going to be with customers." And then it kind of put the year in review in perspective, right? It was like, "Hey, what am I doing for the year?" And then and then the sub of that was you, which was the greatest thing ever, was like if you're going to city X, stay at this hotel, this go to this restaurant. And I think that was like the coolest thing. Like, and it was like a legacy of that. I don't know if it still exists today. Probably not. I don't know.
No, I
There's
think
only a few guys that are
Scott Leslie and Steve Shrigley have still got the
still got
list
it.
that they work from.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's probably stuff that got added to it with different cities and restaurants that go out of business and everything like that. But I thought that what the thing for me was the calendar part of it, which was, when you actually write it down, like starting with your business plan and you look at January through December and you look and say, all right, this is it, where I'm going, how many times I got to see these customers, blah, 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 blah. I think it helped me throughout the rest of my time there on how I managed my schedule as well. And I don't know if a lot of people do that. I think people sometimes it's so fast paced today that they're living literally minute by minute and not even knowing and seeing what's going on a week from now or a month from now. So it could be a lost skill. The other thing I want to say is you mentioned, and I didn't know this, that you wrote for a newspaper. Okay. And you definitely had a writing style. You're a great writer. So was that, and how did that lead into now, however many years later, Like, why did you decide to write the book now? And tell me more about that, like the writing process. It's similar, I would say, to running. Like I run, but I also have to dedicate, set aside the time to do it. Similar to writing a book, I'm assuming you have to like, okay, schedule time to write. And, I know you can't force the creative process, but explain that to me.
Let's go back to the first
Yeah.
part of this, which was the calendar.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I realized when I was in CBD is that just like you said, you get caught up in the fast pace and you say, well, I'm going over here, I'm going over there, and you try to shotgun everything and you end up not hitting a damn thing. So what I did was I took the budget that was available to me, and this was the other important part of this plan. And I said, okay, I'm going to be required to see these people this many times. And if I'm there, I can do this, and I can build that in, build this in. And I overlaid that with a budget. And that's what I worked off of for the year. And, when a request would come in and say, well, okay, we want you to go over here and do this. Well, where's that money going to come from? Because I've got to take money away from this to go do what you're asking me to do. So it helped not only in that regard, but if you, as a salesman, all you have is time. That's all you have. And if you maximize your time, you're going to be more productive. The same is true for writing. And there was a book that I read right after I retired. It was Stephen King wrote a book. It's a memoir called On Writing.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
about
Yes. Oh,
the
yeah.
mental process that he went through to write a book. And I was really fascinated by it. But what works for me may not work for you, may not work for Stephen King, or what works for him may not work for us because every person's mind is different. When I started writing the book, I didn't know what the central theme was going to be, other than I knew the characters in the book. I didn't know where I wanted it to end, although I knew because of history how the war ended. So I had known for some time that my family had fought in the Civil War. Both sides. My mother's family was Mackenzie's, and Scots, and my father's side was Rapers and Andersons. And I knew that they were involved at some point in the Civil War, but I just didn't realize the degree until my sister-in-law, again, let me preface this by saying, growing up in East Tennessee in the 50s and 60s, we were all convinced that our ancestors were carrying the stars and bars and they were, yelling rebel yells and being defeated in that war of northern aggression. And then I got a phone call one day. It was my sister-in-law, who's our resident genealogist and antiques expert. And she said, Scott, I have bad news. And I said, what's that, Anna? And she said, there are Yankees in the family. I went, oh my God. I don't know, but I've got to find out about this. So that's when I started going off in the weeds. And it took me 6 years to research and write this book. And once I discovered that there were six brothers and one nephew that had participated from the Scott side of the family in the war, with four of them fighting for the North and two fighting for the South, I really had to understand what drove those people to make those decisions because it was a very violent and controversial time in the United States. Uh, I used government pension records. I used family Bibles. I used family letters. I used internet resources, which the National Park Service has got great resources on soldiers and sailors databases from the Civil War. Uh, I went to every place that I wrote about, like Cahaba,
Hmm.
Alabama, where the prison is down there. I wanted to see what was Cahaba, Alabama like. I wanted to see Sulphur Trestle. I wanted to experience Andersonville again, which I'd been to before. Uh, and I wanted to feel what those places were like because my book is not, it's not a book about, General Anderson and General Johnson that moved their troops from point A to point B, and then they sat back and they had a glass of wine and watched the battle. I mean, my book is about the nitty gritty, dirty, filthy hardships that these people endured as the war went on. I mean, you're a runner. How many miles do you run a year? Do you know?
Right now, probably around 1600.
Okay, that's a lot. That's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Most of my ancestors and most of the people in that time period were agrarian based. They were
Yeah.
country people. They lived on farms. They never really went more than 5 or 6 miles from home. And as I'm going through this research, I found myself drawn to find out where my great great grandfather and his troops went. And in a little over a 3 year period, he covered over 4,000 miles. And out of that 4,000 miles, he walked 1,900. And it was in hard conditions. It was in snow. It was in mud. I mean, it's hard to imagine what these guys went through. But that's what my book is about. It's about the emotion of that moment, and it's also not just about the soldiers, but it's also about the people that were left at home and what their lives were like. Which you got to understand, 70% of East Tennessee voted to stay in the Union. The rest of Tennessee, Middle and West Tennessee voted to secede. The reason, well, several reasons that East Tennessee voted to stay in the Union. Only 9% of the slaves in 1861 were in East Tennessee. The rest of them were in Middle and West Tennessee, where the plantations are. East Tennessee is hard ground. It's rocky, it's hilly, it's not a plantation atmosphere. So you didn't have those plantations. My family were they were basically sharecroppers. They worked alongside the slaves, they lived alongside the slaves that were there. And that was their life is, eking out a living on that piece of ground. And they were loggers, carpenters, millers. They worked for other people. But what they did was rather remarkable. I mean, the war story that I try to tell is showing that common people can do uncommon things when the times and the circumstances demand it.
Yeah. Um, Real quick, that book, Stephen King on writing, was probably one of the best books I ever read. And I read it in the same kind of thing as you, and I said, "Holy moly!" Like after I read it, I thought I can be a writer, right? Like I was like, this is a really good book to if you wanted to start to become a writer. And I think that there was a part in the book, and why I mention is because I think it feels like it has a lot to do with your book. Is that I think he said, a real good writer and a real good story, and when you're reading a story, it's like time travel because you if you are immersed and you are reading it and you're comprehending it, you literally go to a different place. It's like time travel. You go back in time and you're in that moment. If it's a good book written really well and you are absorbing it and immersing into it. And I thought, man, that is like it's so true. Because I know I've read so many books where I'm like, man, time goes by like that, and next thing you know, you've been reading for 2 hours, and you're like completely in that situation. So I have a feeling that, and I didn't read your book yet, and I will, but I'm hoping that it's that kind of a, get to go back in time, like you're saying. You're talking about the just the regular person. There's so many stories. I was watching some show, and they were talking about Dachau and I was there. And the the story about Dachau was that the town didn't even know what was going on. And you're like,
Right.
how? Like that's not possible. And it's like, yeah, it is. Like not every, like you said, only 9% of the people or whatever it was in Eastern Tennessee and this many this that's what it was like. It wasn't like everybody was the bad guy, you know? But anyway, I just wanted to mention that book because it is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it if you're ever going to think about writing a book. And, he even said in there, like, I'm not going to give away my secrets on what I do and how do I come up with these ideas, but here's some structure around me, Stephen King.
I tell you, one of the things he put in that book that really struck me as meaningful is that he said many times when he starts a book, he has no idea where it's going, no idea where it's going to end, no idea what the characters are going to do. He said it just comes to you, and there's a lot of that in my book. I mean, I was exposed to things while I was writing the book that just absolutely blew me away in a lot of different ways. But my writing, John, was my writing the book coincided with me becoming involved in a group called OSHER. It's the OSHER Lifelong Learning Institute, OLLI. And and there are OSHER campuses across the United States that align with major universities. And they offer educational opportunities for people like me that are retired but want to still learn. And I've taken everything from Hood's campaign to the music of the Beatles to slave trade of 1500. And these are courses that are taught by Vanderbilt professors here. And they're relatively inexpensive, like $60 a quarter. But I joined a writing group there, and there were a dozen of us in that writing group with a man named Victor Judge, who was the mentor for us. And Victor is one of those literary brains that you marvel at it because he knows you name a book, he knows passages from it, author, whatever, it doesn't matter. But what we did was we would meet twice a month and we would share our writing with each other and we critiqued it. And as my book evolved, one of the things that you talk about going back and being in that time, Victor said my book was smoked with verisimilitude. And I said, I graduated from high school in Tennessee. I have
Yeah.
no idea what
What does that mean?
verisimilitude means, so I'm going to
Right.
go look it up. It means being of that time and place. And that was just so meaningful to me because he said, Scott, he said, the beautiful thing about your book is, he said, I couldn't tell if you wrote it in 1880 or if you wrote it in 1980. He said,
That's pretty
it's
cool.
really like being
Yeah.
there. So that was very meaningful to me.
Yeah. I did write a book. It's just a biography type book. There's a lot of life lessons in there. And so my ADHD kicks in all the time. And that's why I run. It's like that's the only time I really feel like in control of what I'm doing is when I'm running. And a similar thing when I was writing, I had to really slow down but I got to that point where I'm also creative. Like I draw and I paint and do all that, right? So like I don't know if you've ever heard like if you're drawing something, you can go and overdraw it. You know what I mean? So the writing for me, it felt like I was going back to page one every day and trying to rewrite the whole thing over again and over again. Right? I had no idea. I just didn't know what I was doing. I used Amazon publishing and all that, but I felt like I was getting to that point where I'm like, man, just be done with this, right? Like it was so stupid. I didn't edit it like I should have. I didn't go in and have other people read it and tell me and all that stuff. So I did it all on my own. So it's like not the most well-written book. It's just a story about me and my family and like all this stuff, right? But I'm sure it's not even remotely close to your story where, let me ask you this question. There's fact and there's fiction. And, I'm assuming, I don't know, but I'm assuming that this is factual based. So when you were going through that writing process, not only telling the story, tell me about how that you have to footnote stuff. Like, you have to cite stuff. That to me seems like I couldn't even grasp how
That's the reason I went with historic fiction. You don't have to do
okay.
bibliography. You don't have to do
Okay.
footnotes.
All
You
right.
you can do influences. You can do references, but you don't have to annotate everything as you go through the book. And
Yeah.
that that
That to
that
me
that
is like I don't even know if I would be like I never did it when I had to write papers in college. I was like, I don't know how to do this.
well, you in my writing group, we discussed the vehicle to use to tell this story. And the vehicle that we decided on was a historic fiction basis. So I don't know if you remember the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Mhm.
George Roy Hill was the producer, and he had a saying. He said, "Not that it matters, but most of it's true."
Yep.
And the same is with my book. The characters were all real, with the exception of two people. They went to the places that they really went to. They did the things they really did. And the fictional part of it is the dialogue. I mean, there's a scene in there where it's in Cahaba prison, and there is a lady that lives there, and her Mrs. Gardner. She lives in Cahaba. Her son has been killed. He was a Confederate. He was killed in the war. Her other son is being held in a Union prison. Her house was right next to the prison in Cahaba, and every day she looked over there and she saw the men suffering. So what she did was she went out and she rounded up drapes and carpets and hats and jackets and pants and anything she could, and took them to the commandant of the prison and had him distribute them among the prisoners. The second in charge of the prison and some of the members of the community thought that that was aiding the enemy, and so they brought charges against her. So she went to be tried in the Cahaba courthouse, which was the old Capitol building in Alabama. And the commandant of the prison defended her. He came to the trial and defended her. So those events actually occurred. What I did was put the dialogue in there to make it more impactful to the reader.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Another quick side story about that perspective, and let's say like that, you know, there's a thing called like false memories. And there's also like my recollection of the story and what I went through versus the other person that was there, what they remembered and all that. And I just had this happen on one of the podcasts I did with a kid I grew up with, this kid, Craig Burns. We were telling a story and he was telling the same story. And then we both forgot like what the reason was, right? And then my older brother called me and said, "Hey, that's really what happened." And I'm like, man, so it's really cool to have that ability to do the fact fiction like writing so that you can fill in those gaps and make it more interesting, I'll say, right? Like there's a kid that we grew up with, his name's Bob Urzick, and he would tell these stories about stuff we did in high school. And it wasn't even him, it was like somebody else. But he would say to me, I'd be like, "Bob, that wasn't you, it was someone else." And he said, "Yeah, but doesn't it sound better when I tell it that way?" And I'm like, "You're right."
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean,
Yeah.
if you can embellish the story, embellish it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, I guess, is this book that you wrote informational. I'm guessing that it's definitely like, I don't know, it's kind of sad in today's world. I have a daughter that's 22 and one that's going to be 19, and they're both at University of Iowa. But, you know, I look back and go, oh man, they weren't even alive, in 2001 and September 11th happened. And they have no recollection of like anything. So to have a book about the Civil War, I know there are definitely niches of, people that are into World War II and World War One and the Civil War to me is like one that I remember reading The Red Badge of Courage in high school, and that was pretty much about it. But other than that, you know, who's your audience for this or the
Uh,
potential audience?
yeah, as I've gone through the marketing side of it, which I'm telling you, John, you learn, as you know, when you change careers, you learn a lot about that career or you die. So I've learned a lot about the book business, but the marketing side of the book business is driven all by metadata now. Everything is driven by data. So online presence has got to be good, but my target market is the Civil War aficionado. It is the reenactors. It is the history buff. It is someone who is interested in things that may have been in Tennessee at certain points in time. Those are the audiences that I'm going after. And what I've been able to do over the last few months is I've gone to middle schools and high schools, and I've spoken to classes, historic societies, museums, civic groups. I'm running about one or two events a week and trying to get the word out. And the other thing you got to it's very tactile here in Tennessee because there were so many battles fought here. I mean, I live in Franklin. One of the biggest battles of the war was fought here. I mean, there were more men on the field that day when Hood made his charge in Franklin than were on the field when Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Now, there were more men involved in the whole battle at Gettysburg, but here you had more men on the field in one day than you did at Gettysburg. So it's real for us. I mean, you drive down the street, you got cannons over here. I'm involved with a group called the Franklin Battlefield Trust. And what they're doing is they raise money to buy pieces of ground and historic buildings so that they're not destroyed, so that they're saved. And they've done a tremendous job. I mean, the other thing about this part of the country is there's a lot of money here. And there are people who want to preserve the heritage, and they want to preserve it from both perspectives. It's not like they want to be, well, we're rebels or we're Yankees. No, they want to preserve that moment in history because it was the only time in our history when Americans fought against Americans and killed each other. That's the only time that that's happened. And it was rather overpowering for me when you go through there and you go to Andersonville and the photo on the cover of the book, the gravestone down at the left-hand corner is Robert Lafayette Scott. That's my great great grandfather's brother. He was grave number 776 at Andersonville, and he was the only one who died. But you walk in that cemetery, and there's 13,000 tombstones there. And it all happened in less than a year and a half that those people died. It's just, it's really rather, it's overwhelming, really.
Yeah. So tell me about like more about the actual like theme of the book. Like what's the I know that you have that dichotomy of like part of the family fighting for the North and part fighting for the South. Is that like the whole crux of the book is just how that story unfolded, or is there another thing in the theme in the book?
Well, for me, the underlying theme of the book is fear.
Okay.
And it really, you learn a lot when you go through and you do research. But one of the things that I learned, and it was really rather difficult for me to wrap my head around, is that my great great grandfather was a coward. I mean, he went down on the battlefield at Resaca and refused to fight and was pulled offline and was lucky he wasn't court-martialed and shot. Uh, I mean, he had already deserted from the Confederate Army. He was conscripted into the Confederate Army, deserted, and joined his brother in the Union in the 5th Tennessee. So that day in Resaca, he just basically sat down and would not move forward, curled up in a ball on the field. He was a coward, but he overcame that later at the Battle of Franklin. So that was that fear. I started back at the first part of the book about how, he's fearful of something, but he doesn't know what. It's in night, and he's looking around. He's doesn't know what's happening. And then as he goes through, and you see fear in several different scenes, which culminates into that moment in Resaca, and then he overcomes that fear in Franklin, and he overcomes that fear because he wants to save his brother. So there's that. The other theme that's in this book is the religious thing, and uh, there's a place called Fushi's Chapel, which is where my great grandfather and some of his brothers are buried. And the Fushi family is a family that they lived on their property and they worked that land. And they're all buried right there together at Fushi's Chapel. And the chapel is at the same place that it was in 1861. Beautiful little spot in East Tennessee. But their their sect was a Presbyterian sect, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and they were descended from Covenanters. And Covenanters were from the 1500s in England, and they took a covenant that they would not recognize the king's right to own a man, that no man could own another man. That carried over to when they migrated to the United States. And in 1818, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church passed a law that said that no slave owner would be allowed to participate in services in that church. So they were strictly abolitionists. They did not have slaves, and they didn't support slaves. I take that back. Fushi did have slaves, but he was a rich dude, so they let him off. Uh, but anyway, and then there's another scene toward the end of the book where the war is about to end. Excuse me, John. And they end up in a church over in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it's a very poignant scene in the book, and I think it's one that that kind of manifests that theme of religion as it goes through the book.
I heard an interesting, I forget what podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about, it might have been, I don't even know. It doesn't matter. But here's what I was getting at with this story and this time of what it was like in the United States. They were talking about how it was like war propaganda, like from the First World War, the people that fought in the Second World War were like, you know, hey, so these my grandfather did it, and it's my obligation now to stand behind, and I'm 100% committed to this American view and American way, and we're going to go fight in the war in World War II. So if you back up and you go, okay, you start with like the American Revolution and then what, right? So then there wasn't like propaganda that said, hey, or maybe there was, I don't even know what it was like for people before this Civil War started. Like, what was the sentiment of the people? Like, you had people that you mentioned in the beginning about getting drafted to go to Vietnam. There was so many people against going to Vietnam at the time, Were there, okay. All right, I can bear, okay. So I'm
This
guessing that,
book,
yeah.
this book is about that.
Okay.
This book is about communications and the methodology and the spin and the marketing of the message. And Marshall McLuhan wrote a book, and in his book, he said the medium is the message. If you control the medium, you control the message. And if you look today, you've got different sides that control different things and they control that message. It was no different back then. And the people that had the newspapers back then, the people that controlled the things that were posted on the courthouse walls. That's where you got your information from. That's where the spin came from at that time. Yeah, it is propaganda, and in a basic structure, that's what it is.
Like, what was the like literacy rate, like in terms of did a lot of people not even know how to read? I mean, I don't know.
Correct.
Like, so then they had word of mouth, and it was like,
Yep.
so my guess in you writing this story is think about how, like when I grew up, you sat at the dinner table, and I talked about this on a couple podcasts. I didn't know what political party my parents were part of, right? But if I had like if my dad was Republican, my mom was Democrat, I mean, what the only thing they could do is just say, or they could talk about it. If the people back then in this propaganda type situation, like you said, control the medium, you control the message. If the message is someone that you know and you love and you're related to, you're going to listen to them, and they could be telling who knows what story, right?
You
It's
talk about not
interesting.
knowing, what your parents' politics were. Uh, I grew up, as I said, in Athens, Tennessee. In 1946, in Athens, Tennessee, the GIs that had returned from World War II, they rose up against the Democratic Party establishment that was controlling East Tennessee, the Cantrell family. And they got guns and dynamite, and they basically took back control because they were, since the compromise, and this is a whole bunch of history, but since the compromise of 1877, the one solid South was created, and it was Democrat control until the 19 Tennessee didn't have a Republican governor until 1969. Everything up to that point, Alabama, George Wallace, Orville Faubus, I mean, all of those guys. But back to the Battle of Athens. The Battle of Athens was fought because the GI ticket ran against the Democratic political machine, and the Democratic political machine actually took the ballot boxes out and would not count the votes and took them to the jail. And they sequestered themselves in the jail with all the ammunition and everything. And they called the governor and said, "We want you to send help." And he said, "No, I'm not going to do it. Those are GIs you're fighting against." So the GIs won. They were able to count the ballots. They won the ticket. But my uncle said something after that day that really has kind of been the basis for my political perspective. And that is, I'm never going to vote straight party ticket again, regardless of what that party is that I'm aligned with. I'm going to look at the person. I'm going to try to look at the person. It's a hell of a lot more difficult today than it ever has been because of all this PAC money that's out there saturating everything. I mean, you ought to be here right now in this special election for Congress. There are millions and millions and millions of dollars being spent for a congressional seat, and it's not Tennessee money that's being spent. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I've been thinking about lately how, define what government is, right? And then the conclusion I come up with is all it is money. I mean, that's basically what it is money, meaning like the government wouldn't exist without federal income tax, right? Like if we're not paying federal income tax or state income tax or even like local property tax, that is the function of government is what are we going to do with the money, your money? That's it. And it is insane how much money gets spent on just on an election. I don't get it. I mean, I get it. I understand it, but that's what it's come down to is, you know, money talks
Tennessee
and
had a guy running
influence.
for governor one time, Ray Blanton, and somebody came up to him and they said, "Ray, can you explain why you're spending $400,000 to get a $30,000 a year job?"
Right. Yeah.
And that's
Exactly.
really what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. Like I actually heard JD Vance on an interview say, I think it was Theo Vaughn interviewed him and he asked him about, hey, you take all this money from donors and is there an expectation of getting something in return? And JD Vance was like, no. And I'm like, come on, dude. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Yeah, someone's gonna
Yeah.
give you millions of dollars just
Yeah.
because they like you
Oh, yeah.
and not
Yeah.
not want anything in return. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and then you have people like Pelosi and McConnell that have been all their lives in office, and they retire with hundreds of millions of dollars, and you go, how does that work?
No, that line right there is that I love that. Why are you spending $400,000 on a $30,000 a year? That is perfect. Hey, that's unbelievable. So let me ask you this about the writing process. I know we kind of touched on a little bit. I know you were a writer, and that's fantastic, and you wrote for the paper and all that. But now you're writing a story and you're writing a book. And like, where did you write it on paper? I mean, a typewriter. Did you want to be like really old school and do it that way, or did you use your computer and then you said it took six years of research and writing, and I mean, how many pages did you end up with, and then how many pages did the book end up?
You mean how many pages did I write originally?
Yeah, like I mean, like I said, like I remember writing, I probably have 100 pages or 150 pages of Word document that I didn't even include in the book. Like give me an idea of like how much, 6 years worth of writing is thousands pages. I mean,
Yeah, probably 700, 800 pages, and I ended up with about a 300-page book. So again, that whole process is one of distillation, and your editors will help you, and they'll also push you. And you've got to have a little pushback every now and then because it is at the end of the day your book. And you've got to take control over what that message is that's coming out. Don't let them try to change that message. Their job is to edit. Their job is to sequence. Their job is punctuation, information flow, that type of thing. So what I did was I built a grid, a big poster board grid, and I did by year and by outfit because there was the 43rd Tennessee, the 5th Tennessee, the 3rd Tennessee, the 2nd Tennessee, and where were they? What did they do during that time period? And I wrote about as much of that as I could really find in my research. And then I went back and I said, okay, this one's rather superfluous. I really don't need that in there. So I'd pull that out. And I tried to distill it and concentrate it as much as I could on what I thought were the more meaningful events that they were exposed to during the war.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I don't know. It's really cool to be able to put words to paper and then actually come up with a finished product, and then have it become pretty, a like successful, I'll say. Let me ask you another question about in today's world of technology and AI. I heard a story, and it was like one of these like how to get rich quick type schemes. And this guy, he said, look, the book world itself, you're going to make, let's just say you made like 5 cents a copy. He was writing like 300 books a month using AI, and all you had to do was sell one or two of these books. And if he wrote 1,000 of them, he's making, 5 cents a book. And it's like, whoa. I mean, I don't know, first of all, who's reading those books, but like, do you feel like, what do you think the future, and this is a big topic right now with comedians and with actors, and I'm guessing it's going to hit the world of writers is, what's real and what's AI, and what's the difference at some point.
Yeah, it's already hit. And I live in Nashville. I've got guys I know that are in the song business, and it's really impacted them as well. But I think, for the ability to write and convey emotion, I don't think is going to go away because I don't think AI is to a point yet, and I don't know if it'll get there where it can convey emotion. And that's going to be the real test of it. I mean, are we going to live in the matrix or are we going to live in the real world? And I know that a lot of people rely on Chat GTP and all these other, AI programs to finish letters and write emails and things like that. But you can tell when they've been generated that way because they're just they're too sterile. They don't carry any evocative language that you or I would use if we were going to write something. So I don't know that it's ever going to totally replace the author or the musician or the filmmaker, but it's definitely going to impact us. There's no doubt about that. Think about this for a minute. You talk about the guy generating the 300 books. Last year in the United States, I was talking to a book agent in New York the other day, and what he told me was he said there are 2 million books that were published last year independently in the United States, which I'm an independent publisher, self-published. The average number of sales per book, 71.
Holy moly. And is that on all formats, meaning like Audible and also like
Everything,
wow,
ebook,
ebook?
everything.
So 71 is an average. Wow. Not to put you on the spot, but how many copies have you guys sold?
I introduced the book the 1st of July and up over 400 right now.
There you go.
So I've been recognized by the Independent Author Network. I was a finalist for them. I am on the long list of the Chanticleer Gothy Awards. Uh, so, I'm in like the top 13 for historic fiction there. Uh, I've been very active marketing my book. I've gone to book festivals, at all of these events I told you about that I'm going and I'm speaking, other than the schools. I sell books at those. This weekend, I have a booth at a Civil War show here in Franklin. That's one of the biggest Civil War shows in the southeastern United States. I'm splitting it with another author who's got a Civil War book, and we're going to go sell our books there because I mean that is our audience. Uh, Next week, I'm going to speak at the Friends of the Franklin Library. That those are the things that you have to do to try to
Yeah.
promote sales of your book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really like you said, retired, now you're learning a new industry and you were successful in business and successful in the corporate world. So now success in this world is the learning process, right? Like how to market it, how to, do all that kind of stuff. And, for me, it was like I just did it because I had time and I wanted to put words to paper and, tell a story. And, I think that was my motivation to do it. And it sounds like it was just secondary learning, motivation, going and taking those classes and so on and so forth. But um, yeah, I think is there anything you would recommend if someone wanted to start to write a book? Like you took 6 years, and it's just if you're not a writer, meaning like okay, your goal to be I'm gonna graduate journalist school or whatever and become a writer. Um, are there any kind of maybe two or three key pieces of advice for someone that's looking to possibly write a book?
The first thing is don't be afraid to write. I mean, you just start. I mean, Confucius said the longest journey begins with the first step, and that's really what it is. You just got to sit down and start, and
Yeah.
you'll find your voice in there somewhere. There are in every community a group of writers. You'd be shocked when you knew how many people actually write. Uh, the library here has got two writing groups that meet, a couple times a month. Like I talked about with Ollie, there's a course there, how to write a memoir, and it's a group of people that get together and how to write a memoir. And then the course that I took was writing life. How do you continue to write basically all your life? But those organizations and those environments will foster creativity, and they allow you to grow as a writer. And they'll challenge you, rightfully so, but that's how you grow as a writer. And but you got to start. I mean, you just got to sit down and you got to start. I've done all mine on. I mean, I took notes when I would go to East Tennessee Historic Society or the Tennessee State Archives or go to Andersonville. I mean, I'd take copious notes. But when I come back, I sit down at the keyboard and I write. All mine's on the computer. I didn't use a typewriter. I didn't handwrite because I'm a word guy. I mean, I like to cut and paste and move stuff around. My son came in one day when he was here visiting, and he was going to do something on my computer, and he sat down and he goes, "Well, where are all the letters?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "All the letters are worn off the keys. How do you know how to write?" And I said, ASDFJKL semicolon. I said, "That was a class I took in high school,
Yeah.
typewriting." I took it because the cute girls were there, and I never realized how much I would use it during my business career. But it really has helped.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I did a podcast with I think it was with my wife and I was talking about how remember like this I don't remember what year it was, say 1992 or something, where your resume you had how many words you could type per minute. And you had to do like a typing test, like, oh, 120 words per minute. Okay. That was like your qualification to get a job. That's how
Yeah.
fast you could type without making mistakes. Um, a quick funny CBD. Let's go like change subjects here for a second. The CBD story, which is pretty funny. You mentioned Word, and I remember when I first joined and I moved out here to Moline, and I was in the office all the time in the beginning, and Heidi, poor Heidi, was Roger's, right hand person. And do you remember how he would do his monthly report? He had a monthly report, and he had that like he would talk into the microphone, and it was his dictaphone tape recorder, and it was from literally probably like I don't even know 1970s. I don't even know what year
It
it was from.
was. It was from the
Right.
1970s.
Right. And so like that technology in 2011, it was probably pretty hard to find if the thing broke, okay? And it did that
Yeah.
happened one time, okay? It happened. But I remember telling Heidi, I was like, "Look, we're in 2012, and this was like right when talk to text kind of like the software for Word, you could actually speak and it would write in Word." And I said, "Why doesn't Roger just do that?" And he was just so set on that stupid dictaphone thing. And I remember Heidi almost having a heart attack because it broke. And she had to, like, I don't know where she found the parts for it or whatever, but she got it fixed. I just thought that was hilarious. I'm like, what in the world are we doing? And another real quick CBD story was I had to do a we all had to do monthly reports, but I had to do that signature customer
Yeah.
newsletter.
Yeah.
And I can remember I would I would have to email it to John Hale. Okay. He would print it out and then he would use the red pen and edit it. Okay. No, this gets better. He literally was 10 feet away from me, his office. Scott, he would take it, put it in an inner office envelope, and then mail it back to me through the inner office. And I'm like, it would go to corporate, come back to the Moline office. I would open it up and it'd be this red lined document that I would have to retype. Oh my God. But I'll tell you though, and writing to me was my biggest weakness. You mentioned like what is the theme of the book? Fear and religion. My theme of I was a really crappy, shitty writer. But until I read that book, I didn't understand how to write. Like I just wrote like I talked versus like writing to make sense and tell a story and have a structure. And learning that is a skill. Absolutely is a skill. Like you either have it or you don't. You can learn it. And I had to learn it the hard way. And I had a manager way early on in my career that said, "You can't write for shit. You better learn how to write." And I was like, "Oh man, he's right." Writing proposals or writing like
Oh
customer
yeah.
letters and stuff. And it is definitely not a lost art, meaning that in today's world of text and abbreviations and all that kind of stuff, it's like, man, like I'll get text from my daughter and I'm like, I don't even know what this says. I have no idea what these acronyms are.
Uh,
But anyway, I really appreciate you. So what I want you to do is I want you to send me all your information on the book, how people can get it. I'm sure it's on Amazon or I'm sure it is wherever. If there's a website, I'll weave it all and edit it all into this episode. And I want to say thank you again for coming on. I want to give you an audience, give you a voice to kind of start spreading that marketing of this book and who is Scott Anderson. And yeah, I really appreciate you doing this. I do also sh want to share another quick story. Do you remember I came down there to visit you and you drove me around everywhere? You drove me downtown to Nashville. You showed me all the like the touristy sites and stuff like that. But there was a place we went. We went to your house, and you mentioned earlier about the money that's there, and I didn't realize how many like how big and vast of like the land area with horses and stuff like it was. I was like blown away with the rolling hills and roads and stuff like that. But um, we went somewhere, and I don't remember what bar it was, but you took me to a restaurant bar type place. It was like the coolest place. It was like a old kind of feel to it, but I don't remember what it was. Maybe you do. I don't know. We were either in Franklin or we were in Nashville or somewhere outside of Nashville. But it was like this really cool, like swanky kind of a bar where I think I'm not sure if you were drinking whiskey or bourbon or something, but it was a cool experience. I wanted to thank you again for doing that with me.
Yeah, I don't know if that would have been the Southern downtown, which is Tommy Morales's place, which is kind of a New York style bar. There's a place in downtown Franklin that's 55 South that's on a corner down there, and it's like walking back in time
It
in
might have
certain
been that
ways.
one. It might have been that one. But
But yeah,
yeah, so
you
sit
know,
go
it's
ahead.
great to see you again. It's fantastic to be able to have a conversation like this because that means that, maybe somebody else will see this and want to go buy
Yeah.
a book.
Yeah. I agree. No, I agree. And I think sending me all the links and the pictures and all that kind of stuff, I'll put it in here and I hope people do want to purchase the book and learn more about the Scott boys.
I just hope that Spielberg and Hank show up with a jet with a movie
Yeah.
deal.
Well, you're pretty good at marketing. So
Yeah,
start
but I
making
don't know
some
if I'm
phone
that
calls.
damn good.
Yeah. All right, Scott, I really appreciate it. I hope everything's going all right for you down there. And maybe I mean, we're coming down in January. And I know I've reached out to you a couple times before, and I don't know, it hasn't worked out, but I'm going to be down there in January, and I'm definitely going to try to hook up with you.
That'd be great. I've got Craig Lamarck is here and
Oh,
Andrew
that's right.
Christopher's here. They're both working for work and I run
Yeah.
into them on occasions, but it's always great to reconnect with people like yourself.
All right, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for your time. I'll talk to you. See ya.